Okay, let's dive in. Today, we're looking at something, well, it's a piece of history that feels like it should be common knowledge, but somehow isn't.
It's quite shocking when you first encounter it. We're talking about a film, an official documentary, commissioned right at the end of World War II.
Yeah, involving major Allied command, even cinematic giants like Alfred Hitchcock advising, and its purpose was to be the definitive record of Nazi atrocities in the concentration camps.
The definitive visual proof, compiled immediately from footage shot during liberation. But then, poof, it gets locked away.
Yeah.
Hidden. Deliberately hidden, it seems, for almost 70 years. That's what we're exploring today. The German Concentration Camps Factual Survey, or GCCFS. It was meant to be a 75-minute British production using footage from British, American, and Soviet cameramen, painstakingly put together. So our mission really is to unpack this whole saga. Why the urgency in 1945? What was Hitchcock actually doing? And the big one, why suppress something so vital? And then how did it finally see the light of day? It's a story about truth, politics, filmmaking, and a very long wait. The basics are 75 minutes, British-led, producer Sidney Bernstein, script by Richard Crossman and Colin Wools. But this story is so much more than those facts.
Absolutely.
The why behind its suppression is, well, it's complicated and pretty revealing about the post-war world.
Let's start right at the beginning. In 1945, this wasn't some, slow academic project conceived years later. There was a real fire under it.
Oh, completely. It was driven by immediate, visceral shock. The key figure pushing this was Sidney Bernstein.
The cinema guy, Ministry of Information advisor.
That's him. And his motivation came directly from what he saw with his own eyes. He visited Bergen-Belsen concentration camp on April 22nd, 1945.
Wow, just a week after the British liberated it.
Exactly. And the sheer scale of death, the skeletal state of the survivors. He described it as something that just hit him. He instantly knew it had to be documented, filmed, shown.
So it wasn't just about history, it was about impact.
Absolutely. He was determined to create a film so undeniable, so raw, that nobody could dismiss it as Allied propaganda. And initially, the target audience was very specific. German people themselves. It was conceived as part of the denazification effort, to force them to confront what had happened.
And this wasn't just Bernstein's personal project, it had official backing.
Top-level backing. The order came from the Psychological Warfare Division, PWD. That was part of HA's Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force.
So Eisenhower's command structure, this was serious.
Very serious. And initially, it was planned as a joint effort. British and American resources were supposed to be pooled.
Gathering the footage must have been a nightmare, right? In the middle of all that chaos.
A huge logistical challenge. They had to collect silent footage from combat cameramen. The guys embedded with the troops, British, American, even Soviet forces.
Just documenting what they found as they advanced.
Right. But they also needed sound. So specialized newsreel cameramen were brought in to get interviews, capture ambient sound, record testimonies on the spot, often under, well, horrific conditions.
And the scope. What camps did they actually manage to film?
The final film covers 14 locations. 10 of those were major concentration camps. We're talking Belsen, Dachau, Buchenwald, Auschwitz, and Majdanek, too, the infamous names.
And the footage itself, I mean, we've all seen some images, but this was the raw, unfiltered stuff.
Relentlessly graphic. Piles of bodies, starved survivors who were just, well, walking skeletons. The evidence in the crematory ovens, burned remains. It held nothing back.
You mentioned it was intended for denazification, but it had another immediate use, too, didn't it? As evidence.
Yes, absolutely crucial. Even before the film was finished, reels were being used in war crimes trials, specifically at the trial of Joseph Kramer.
The Beast of Belsen.
That's the one. He tried to claim the conditions were just due to wartime shortages, lack of food towards the end, basically blaming circumstances, not his actions.
But the film showed otherwise.
Completely contradicted him. The footage showed the sheer scale, the organization of the neglect and killing. It wasn't just chaos. It was policy. The film was forensic proof.
That's powerful, using the film as evidence while it's still technically in production.
It underscores the weight of what they were capturing.
Yeah.
And there's that anecdote about filming the perpetrators right there in the camp.
Right, interviewing captured SS officers.
Yes, including a man named Fritz Klein. He was later executed for his atrocities at Belsen. The newsreel crew filmed him giving an interview, standing directly in front of a huge pile of corpses.
His own victims.
His victims. The camera just holds there, capturing him, the bodies, the context, immediate, undeniable. That urgency is palpable throughout the early stages of this project.
So the evidence was overwhelming, the mandate was clear, the backing was there. It seems unstoppable, which makes the involvement of someone like Hitchcock even more intriguing. Why bring in the master of suspense?
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Because even with all that raw evidence, there was a fear. A very specific fear that Hitchcock perhaps uniquely understood.
Right, so Hitchcock gets involved, but let's be clear on his role. He wasn't directing the whole thing, was he?
No, that's a common misconception. The Imperial War Museum is quite clear. He was a treatment advisor. His main involvement was for about a month. When
It
exactly?
was after the bulk of the footage was shot, but before they'd really assembled the rough cut. His job wasn't to shoot anything, but to advise on how to structure and present the existing footage.
And his big concern,
Right.
it's kind of chilling.
It really is. Hitchcock's primary worry was that the atrocities shown in the film, the scale of the killing, the inhumanity, were simply too unbelievable. Too horrific for people to accept as real.
Exactly. He feared that audiences, confronted with something so monstrous, so far beyond normal experience, would instinctively reject it. They'd assume it had to be faked,
Right.
that the Allies were using propaganda tricks, exaggerating for effect.
Wow. So the master of cinematic manipulation was worried about being accused of manipulation when presenting the truth.
Precisely the paradox.
Hmm.
And his solution was fascinating. The man famous for tricky editing, for constructing suspense through cuts and angles, advised the complete opposite approach here.
What did he recommend then? How do you make the unbelievable believable on film?
His core advice was, avoid any appearance of manipulation. No quick cuts, no dramatic montages, nothing that could look like you were stitching unrelated things together for effect. So what instead?
Long takes and long, slow panning shots. He argued that if the camera holds on a scene, say panning slowly across a vast pit filled with bodies, or across a long line of emaciated survivors, without cutting away.
You're documenting an uninterrupted reality. Exactly. It becomes much harder for a viewer to claim, oh, they just cleverly edited that together. The sustained gaze of the camera becomes a form of visual testimony. It forces the viewer to confront the whole unbroken horror.
That's incredibly insightful. Using the camera's stillness as proof. Did he have other specific ideas?
Yes, particularly about confronting the local German population. He strongly suggested including scenes where German villagers, people who lived right near the camps,
Were made to visit them after liberation.
yes, forced to walk through, to see the bodies, the crematoria, the survivors, to confront the reality of what happened literally in their backyard. Hitchcock understood this wasn't just about documenting what happened, but about showing complicity, or at least proximity, and the impossibility of not knowing.
Undermining denial at the source.
Right. And he also focused on the small details, the personal items, as a way to convey the immense scale of the killing.
The piles of belongings.
Precisely. He recommended focusing on those mountains of personal effects found in the camps, especially places like Majdanek. Piles of human hair, wedding rings, spectacles, toothbrushes.
Everyday objects.
Ordinary, everyday objects, but in unimaginable quantities. It shifts the focus from abstract numbers to individual lives.
There's that specific detail in the narration about the spectacles, isn't there?
Yes, accompanying this huge pile of eyeglasses, the narration starkly notes something like perhaps 1 victim in 10 wore spectacles.
And when you see the size of the pile,
You do the horrifying math. It makes the scale personal, tangible. It connects the vastness of the crime to the intimate reality of a single person needing glasses. It's a very clever, very Hitchcockian way to make the incomprehensible hit home.
so they had this powerful footage, and now they had a strategy from Hitchcock himself on how to present it for maximum undeniable impact. It seems like they had everything needed to create a landmark film.
They did. The vision was there, the material was there, the strategy was there, which makes what happened next all the more baffling and, frankly, disturbing.
The fact that it just stopped.
Stopped dead in its tracks.
Okay, so September 1945, they screen a rough cut, about 5 reels done, and then silence. The project is just abandoned.
Effectively, yes, abandoned, unfinished. Those 5 reels, plus all the unused footage and documentation, basically went into a vault at the Imperial War Museum.
Now, the official reasons given at the time sound almost mundane, don't they? Bureaucratic hurdles.
Yeah, the initial explanations pointed to things like, practical difficulties, problems coordinating between the Allies. Remember, the U.S. had pulled out of the joint project by July 45. Post-war shortages, apparently even finding a working editing machine was difficult.
But did those really explain shutting down such a high-priority project completely?
They certainly caused delays, significant delays. But the consensus among historians now, looking back with access to the documents, is that these delays were long enough for the political landscape to shift dramatically. The film was, as the official jargon went, overtaken by other events.
Meaning the political will just evaporated.
Essentially, yes. By late 1945, the immediate post-liberation focus on shock, documentation, and punishing Germany was already changing. The Allied authorities started thinking longer term about governing occupied Germany.
And suddenly, a film graphically detailing Nazi atrocities wasn't seen as helpful anymore.
Exactly. The official thinking became that a one-hour compilation of atrocity material, as they put it, was no longer considered appropriate. They needed the German population not just punished, but cooperating in rebuilding.
Especially with the Cold War starting to loom.
Precisely. Germany, or at least Western Germany, needed to become a stable, functioning buffer against the Soviet Union, showing this devastating film, rubbing salt in the wounds, fostering shame and anger. It started to look counterproductive to the new goal of building a partnership. A more congenial approach was deemed necessary.
So the urgent moral imperative of April gave way to strategic political calculation by September. That's incredibly fast.
It shows how quickly post-war priorities were shifting. But it wasn't just about managing relations with Germany. There was another major political factor, particularly for the British.
This is the Palestine connection.
Yes, this is critical and often overlooked. Britain held the mandate for Palestine, and the situation there was becoming extremely volatile.
With the pressure from Jewish survivors wanting to immigrate.
Immense pressure. Thousands of Jewish refugees, survivors of the camps, were displaced across Europe, desperate to get to Palestine. The Zionist movement was gaining huge momentum, demanding Britain allow mass immigration.
But Britain was caught in the middle, also dealing with Arab opposition.
Exactly. They were trying to limit Jewish immigration to quell Arab unrest and maintain control. So how does the concentration camp film fit in?
It would generate massive sympathy for the Jewish survivors.
Overwhelming sympathy. The British government feared that releasing this incredibly powerful film, vividly showing the horrors inflicted specifically on European Jews, would create unstoppable international political pressure. Pressure to open the gates to Palestine, which would completely derail their policy.
So the film was seen as politically unhelpful to managing the Palestine situation.
That seems to be the assessment. Geopolitical convenience, managing the mandate, managing relations with Germany took priority over releasing this historical document. It's a stark choice.
It's staggering, sacrificing the record of the Holocaust for colonial policy management. And there's another layer to this, the film's content itself, or rather, what it didn't explicitly say.
Yes, this is another complex and uncomfortable aspect. The original 1945 film, despite showing the camps where millions of Jews were murdered, made no explicit mention of the Holocaust as a specific targeted genocide against Jewish people.
How is that even possible, given the evidence they were filming?
Well, there are a couple of potential reasons debated by historians. One is simply that, even in mid-1945, the full systematic nature of the final solution wasn't yet fully comprehended by everyone on the ground, even the filmmakers. It took time for the complete picture to emerge.
Okay, a failure of immediate understanding, perhaps. But you mentioned another factor, something about propaganda guidelines.
Yes, and this is more troubling. There was apparently a British Ministry of Information guideline dating back to 1941.
What did it say?
It advised propagandists, if they wanted to maintain maximum public credibility and support for the war, to focus on the suffering of indisputably innocent people, but not to specifically highlight violent political opponents or Jews.
Wait, don't focus on Jewish victims because it might hurt the war effort's image.
The implication, disturbing as it is, was that highlighting Jewish suffering specifically might tap into underlying anti-Semitism in the Allied populations themselves, potentially weakening broad support. It was a cynical calculation about public opinion.
And that thinking might have carried over into 1945, into the making of this film.
It's possible. Whether consciously or subconsciously, the filmmakers might have adhered to this older principle, framing the atrocities as crimes against humanity in general, rather than naming the specific targeting of Jews, perhaps fearing it would somehow lessen the universal impact or credibility.
So the very group most systematically targeted for annihilation was potentially downplayed in the official record, partly out of a fear rooted in anti-Semitism itself. That's deeply ironic and tragic.
It's a very difficult part of the story. Now, while the British project stalled, the footage didn't completely disappear immediately. The Americans used some of it.
Right, for death mills.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the big British film wasn't happening, the American military government in Germany rushed out their own film, Death Mills, directed by the famous Billy Wilder. It came out in January 1946.
Using much of the same horrific footage.
Yes, but it was a very different film. Much shorter, only 22 minutes. And reportedly much more direct, almost like a news report, compared to the more reflective, meditative approach Bernstein had envisioned for the full 75-minute GCCFS.
So the world got a version, but not the version, not the one Hitchcock advised on.
Not the full intended statement. And it would take decades for even the incomplete British version to surface publicly.
That was Memory of the Camps, right? In the 80s.
Yeah. The 5 existing rough-cut reels were finally shown, first at the Berlin Film Festival in 1984, and then broadcast on PBS's Frontline in 1985, narrated by Trevor Howard. It was powerful, but everyone knew it wasn't the finished film. It lacked proper sound, and crucially, the entire 6th reel was missing.
So a shadow of the original project haunted film history for decades, until someone decided to finally complete it.
Exactly, and that Herculean task fell to the Imperial War Museum.
So the IWM, the Imperial War Museum in London, they had the materials gathering dust since the 50s.
Essentially, yes. They became the official custodians back in 1952. They held the 5 rough-cut reels, the original script, and crucially, about 100 reels of raw, unused footage, plus a detailed shot list for the missing 6th reel.
So they had all the pieces just unassembled and neglected.
Pretty much. But the actual work to do something with it didn't start until much later, around December 2008.
What prompted it then?
It started partly as a preservation effort for the deteriorating 1984 Memory of the Camps version, but then the IWM team made a really important decision.
Which was?
Not just to preserve the incomplete version, but to go back to the original 1945 plan, to finally complete the 75-minute German concentration camp factual survey, exactly as Bernstein and his team, with Hitchcock's advice, had intended it, using all the original documentation they had.
That sounds like a massive undertaking. Technically difficult.
Hugely difficult. We were talking about 60-plus-year-old film stock, combat footage, probably not stored perfectly. The technical achievement was immense. They digitized everything.
Bringing it up to modern clarity.
Yes, and contemporary accounts say it transformed this grainy past into a vivid present. It apparently gave the footage an immediacy, a sharpness that was even more impactful, more horrifying than the degraded version seen before.
And the missing 6th reel. How did they tackle that? They couldn't just guess what was supposed to be in it.
No, and they didn't have to. That original 1945 shot list was the key. It laid out exactly which shots, which sequences were planned for that final reel.
So they could find that specific footage among the 100 raw reels they had.
Exactly. They meticulously located the corresponding shots and rebuilt the reel according to the original plan. Apparently, they reconstructed it almost perfectly. Only 2 maps couldn't be found and had to be replaced with modern recreations.
Incredible. Did they add sound? The 84 version lacked it?
Yes. They sourced authentic sound effects from the period, from the museum's own archives to create the soundscape. And crucially, they finally recorded the original narration script, the one written by Richard Crossman and Colin Wills back in '45. Actor Jasper Britton provided the voice.
So, after almost 70 years, the film, as originally conceived, was finally complete. Where did it premiere?
Fittingly, perhaps, at the Berlin Film Festival in 2014, 69 years after it was supposed to be finished.
That must have been an extraordinary moment.
A profound moment of, as you say, cinematic reclamation. It was later released in North America in 2017, distributed by a company called 3 Generations.
And that company has a connection.
A direct connection. It was founded by Jane Wells, Sidney Bernstein's daughter, bringing the family's commitment full circle after all that time.
What was the reaction? Did the completed film live up to its troubled history? Did it still have that power?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Critics were deeply affected. The New York Times called it an extraordinary act of cinematic reclamation and historiography.
And they commented on its tone, right? That it avoided easy sentimentality.
Yes, that was a key point. The film doesn't try to offer uplift or talk about the triumph of the human spirit. It stays relentlessly focused on the stark reality, the suffering, the starvation, the evidence of mass murder. It refuses to look away or offer false comfort.
So it fulfilled Hitchcock's goal of unflinching documentation.
Precisely. The Times also noted that while the imagery might feel familiar from other Holocaust films or documentaries, this felt different because it is different. It's not a narrative reconstruction. It's the primary source, presented with that raw authenticity they thought for in 1945.
The story of the film itself is so compelling, it actually inspired another documentary, didn't it?
It did. The restoration and release of the GCCFS directly led to the making of Night Will Fall in 2014.
Right, Night Will Fall. So this wasn't the restored 1945 film itself, but a documentary about the 1945 film.
Exactly.
Directed by Andre Singer, it's a 70-minute film that tells the whole story we've been discussing. The urgent creation of the GCCFS, Hitchcock's involvement, the reasons for its suppression, and the long road to restoration. It explains the why behind the silence.
Precisely. It puts the restored footage into its historical and political context. The title itself is very evocative.
It comes from the original narration, yes, from a line in the 1945 script. Unless the world learns the lesson these pictures teach, night will fall. A chilling warning. What does Night Will Fall actually show? Does it use much of the original footage?
It includes about 12 minutes of the restored GCCFS footage, enough to give you a sense of its power. But its real value comes from the new material it presents.
Like interviews. Yes, recent interviews with people connected to the story, survivors who were liberated, Allied soldiers who were there, even some of the original film crew who were still alive in the 2010s. Those survivor accounts must be incredibly powerful, linking the past horror to the present day.
Absolutely essential. For example, Branko Lustig is interviewed.
A survivor of Auschwitz and Belsen who later produced Schindler's List.
That's him. And in Night Will Fall, he speaks very directly about why he believes the 1945 film was shelved. He points to the shifting politics, the Cold War. But he specifically mentions the British difficulty over Palestine. He says, quite bluntly, the Brits had enough problems with the Jews.
Wow, that's direct testimony supporting the political analysis we discussed.
It is. And he also shares this incredibly vivid personal memory of liberation at Belsen. He was just a boy, 12 years old, incredibly weak.
What does he remember?
He remembers hearing music, the sound of bagpipes, played by the liberating Scottish forces, but he was so traumatized, so close to death, he thought he was dead and was hearing the music of angels.
Oh my goodness, that captures the absolute disorientation and trauma.
It really does.
Hmm.
Another survivor interviewed is Eva Moses Kaur. She describes the liberation of Auschwitz by Soviet soldiers in the snow wearing white camouflage.
What does she recall?
She remembers them giving the starving prisoners little things, chocolate, cookies, and hugs. These small human gestures amidst the vastness of the horror. These personal stories in Night Will Fall are crucial. They ground the archival footage in individual experience.
And Night Will Fall itself got a wide release, didn't it? It brought this whole hidden story to a global audience.
Yes, the timing was very deliberate. It was broadcast internationally on major networks, HBO in the US, Channel 4 in the UK, and others, all during the week of Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27th, 2015.
Which was the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz.
Exactly. Maximum visibility for a story that had been invisible for so long.
And it was well received critically.
Hugely well received. Got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics recognized its importance. The Guardian said the footage exposes once again the obscenity of Holocaust denial.
And they echoed Hitchcock's original concern too, didn't they? About the impact of the images.
Yes, The Guardian included a warning advising viewers that once seen, these images cannot be unseen. It speaks volumes about the enduring power of the footage that Bernstein commissioned and Hitchcock helped shape, finally presented in its proper context.
So after 70 years, the film and the story behind the film finally got the attention they deserve.
A long overdue acknowledgement. #outro.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive into the German concentration camps factual survey really leaves you with a lot to think about. It's not just about one lost film.
No, it touches on so much more. We've seen Hitchcock's almost counterintuitive genius using absolute realism, those long takes, to authenticate something utterly unbelievable, fighting the potential for denial before it even started.
And then the stark reality of why it was buried. Immediate political needs dealing with occupied Germany, the brewing Cold War, and especially that intense pressure surrounding the British mandate in Palestine, those took precedence over documenting genocide.
It's a clear example of geopolitical convenience overriding historical imperative. And of course, we have to acknowledge the incredible work of the Imperial War Museum. Their decades-long stewardship and eventual restoration finally allowed Bernstein's original vision to be realized.
It really ensures the film exists now, as intended, a permanent, undeniable record. But it does leave us, and you listening, with a pretty challenging final thought, doesn't it?
It does. The whole controversy hinged on this calculation. Would revealing the full truth interfere with current political goals? If something as fundamentally important as the GCCFS with footage that clear, that damning, could be suppressed because it was politically inconvenient, it makes you wonder.
What else? What other truths, maybe less visually stark but equally important, were quietly shelved or delayed in that post-war era, or even since, simply because they didn't fit the political narrative of the moment.
What are the long-term costs when we prioritize immediate political comfort over confronting difficult historical realities? How much of our understanding of the past is shaped by what was allowed to be seen and said at the time?
That's a question the story of the GCSEFS forces us to ask. What else is still waiting in the archives, unseen, unheard, because the timing wasn't right or the message was deemed unhelpful? It's something to keep thinking about.